Hey everybody, P. Turner, executive producer and host of the Break It Down Show. I thought I'd start as I'm waiting for Will to get in. Will always is running a few minutes late because he's squeezing us in between work as a professor at historically black college, Kentucky and Kentucky State University. So we're going to talk to him because he is an expert on hate crime hoaxes. We just had one happen on the BYU campus when BYU ladies volleyball played against Duke volleyball, and there was a claim. And there's my good friend Ryan Petty. Hey, Ryan. Ryan's working on being able to hear us and talk, so I'll let him do that. So there was a hate crime hoax. Let's see, end of August, there was a game between Duke's volleyball team, ladies volleyball, against the ladies from BYU, and game was at BYU. And there was claims of racial epithets and other, well, frankly, inappropriate and potentially criminal language. And there was a lady who from the team made this claim, and everybody jumped on it. Everybody jumped on it and said, "This can't stand. We won't have it. BYU is full of a bunch of racists. South Carolina can't try to cancel games. They had a home and away series with BYU, and all of these things, came to a head. BYU began its investigation. They identified a person who was accused of making these comments, and it's all the standard hurtful language. You can look this up and read all about the story. Here's the thing: never happened, and it never happened to this point. BYU did their investigation, and obviously they want to get to the bottom of this. They had banned this accused guy, as they started going forward and not allow them access to their facilities as they got the investigation going. And then they got through the investigation, talked to 50 plus people, and the whole thing didn't happen. It's crazy because these accusations mean something, and we all are desperate to not have these kind of things happen. But when they don't happen, the backlash is missing. And so we see this accusation. And here's the things. It's fair to say, did BYU do a good job in its investigation? And that's fair to say. I mean, 50 plus people at the game, they reviewed people's video from the game to see if they could find the event on audio or video, and found nothing. And then they said, "Hey, listen, we've done a thorough investigation. If you have data, if you have any kind of actual hard proof of this happening, produce it. We'd love to see it so we can take different actions. But for right now, we can't. There's no founding in this thing. It's just one person's word against, well, frankly, nearly 100 other people that have said, we didn't see that." And this is in a public space with a public person they identified, and then there's no evidence other than the claim that this happened. Even people on the teams are like, "I didn't hear that." So this is a crazy thing, but the news ran with it, just like they did with the Duke lacrosse, just like they did with the Covington kids, just like. And we get these narratives. And anytime we have a chance to talk about this, we talk to Will because he's the expert. And Ryan, how's your audio? Is it working now?
Can you hear me okay, Pete?
Yes,
awesome.
We got you.
I'm here.
When you first heard of this story, look, so Ryan is a friend. We vacationed together and everything. So all that known, but Ryan is Mormon. Ryan is an alum of BYU. When you first heard this accusation against BYU, before we knew anything else, what were your first thoughts?
Well, my initial reaction was, oh my gosh, I can't believe that would happen at my alma mater. That's not the school that I attended.
Right.
And then as I started to read some of the media reports and learned a little bit more about the source of the initial complaint, and I think we'll probably get into that a bit, but it was I think the player's grandmother on social media making the accusations that were picked up by the media. I went, something smells fishy here. And then, Pete, as you were describing, as the investigation began and we learned more and more, you would have thought that there would have been some corroborating evidence, and we didn't see any. And so again, my initial reaction was, this highly unlikely this would happen at my school. And the fact that no one else heard it, I quickly thought, no, this isn't real, and they're targeting BYU with this accusations like this because, for political reasons.
It's funny. There's a great story on the New York Post. I'm going to put this link in the notes here and bring Will in. Hey, Will, how are you?
Hey, Pete. Hey, David.
New York Post, they identified some BYU academic reporters who went out and just did basic journalism work. Let's not jump. I mean, look, I've got a journalism degree. Don't jump to conclusions. Go find the facts. Ask the next question. Ask the question after that. Cross-verify. And something like this is important. Someone's life can be ruined by these accusations. And these damned kids went out and just did the job. And they're like, this is all unfounded. And if there is evidence, no one has it. No one's produced it. No one's pushed it forward. So I think it's important that we understand that. And I'm going to share that link with the New York Post. Hey, Will, you're the expert on hate crime hoaxes. What was your first reaction when you heard this story?
Well, I mean, it was kind of a mixed bag. On the one hand, I assumed, frankly, so I'll start with the positive, kind of polite response. Anytime someone alleges a crime or something like that, you want to give them a chance. I mean, one of the things I say pretty much every time I talk about hate crime hoaxes, when I was putting together the data set for that book, we found that the large majority of ordinary claims, you're a white or black guy and you claim that you, quote unquote, got your ass kicked at a bar after hours by members of the other group, sexual assault, those were real. So that's the one hand. The other hand, though, is that almost none of these kind of cinematic Jussie Smollett sort of claims turned out to be true. So like when this happened, my initial reaction was there's no way that's true. Brigham Young is what? They're in the Pac-10, Pac-12 now, or the Big 12. I mean, this is an arena with, 6,000 kids in it. Yeah. You know that, I mean, in terms of like volleyball players and their social life, I assume a lot of white and black football, basketball players are there to support their girlfriends. Wouldn't really have tolerated that. They have the usual 8 cops around the arena. So the original claim was that every single time a black player served, especially this one at Duke athlete, someone was yelling nigger, frankly, the N-word, and these offensive racial slurs loudly. This was heard across the arena. It was like, there's no way that's true. There's no way some guy from the football team wouldn't have gone up there and confronted this guy, or a cop wouldn't have moved this guy out. There's no way. So that you have to balance. You want to give someone a chance with, no, there aren't guys in MAGA hats beating up second-tier TV actors in downtown Chicago.
When you are in a loud place like that, it's cacophonous, and it can be hard to hear everything that's going on around you. If you play a jousty game of spades, you might point at someone and say "renegger." I mean, and I'm not saying that they're throwing words around that are similar, but we're not even hearing that. Like, oh, you know what? It's Schwarzenegger. I was saying Schwarzenegger, or some word that's kind of is a homonym kind of thing. That's not even the case here. There's no evidence of it.
Yeah, I don't know if Dave wants to take that one, but yeah, they did standard police work. They went around the arena. I think that the key point the guest just made is that whatever you started off thinking, these are basic journalistic questions. I mean, like BYU's got to have an SID, right? A sports information director. Do they have video of the game? Was anything heard during the game? What about the students? Get the students at the rows close to court. Get those basketball players, interview them. Did anyone hear anything? And it turned out a bunch of kid journalists did that, right?
Yep.
For you guys, I mean,
there's the story right there. You can look in the comments. You'll see the link for the story. It's these damned kids went and broke the case. Ryan, I have a lot of family that's Mormon, and I've been to BYU a couple of times. And one time, my friends and I, and none of us are Mormon, we're playing basketball. We're outside in the court. This is like in the student housing area off campus. And, we're just balling, having fun. But we're being respectful. Like, we're not trying to, like, swear like we might normally. So we're not that we were all that big of swearers anyhow. And twice, people came by and said, hey, watch your language. And we're like, whoa, what did we say? Did something slip out? And it was like words like minor swears, like damn. Or yeah. It's like we weren't saying golly or oh my heck, like these very soft kind of missing things. And this seemed to be the norm for BYU students who were all sort of, look, this is a religious university, right? Like you expect a certain code of conduct, and you expect that bar to be pretty high.
Yeah, you're right, Pete. And that was sort of the BYU that I remember going to or attending, and sometimes it felt a little bit. I hate to use the O word, but oppressive in certain situations. If you did the minor swears or whatever, somebody was after you. So that can be annoying at times. But the reason, as you mentioned, BYU is a religious school. the reason that the students sort of self-police is that we agree to live by what's called the BYU Honor Code. And that includes, in essence, in a nutshell, it's trying to live as close to how we believe our Savior Jesus Christ would want us to live. And that includes treating other people the way that we believe he would want us to treat them. And certainly yelling racial epithets in a crowded gymnasium would cross that line. It would cross the honor code. It would be a violation of the honor code. So students self-police there, in addition to, the journalism angle that you mentioned, and the fact that no one else heard this, and the fact that there was a full investigation. It just wouldn't be tolerated by other students. And so, that's sort of the underlying context that is everywhere. And you saw it, as you play basketball off campus, you hear those kinds of, you hear students correcting each other all the time, trying to improve who they are and how they live, how they treat other people.
Will, I wanted to ask you, because you've done the actual academic research, and it's let me put the link for your book up here. His book is called Hate Crime Hoax. It's got a longer title, but you can just go on to Amazon and grab that. There's hallmarks of these things, but not just to say, hey, this might be a hoax. I guess two-part question. Why do we not learn to pause? Like, hey, if this is true, it's horrible, and we're going to deal with it, right? And then two, when we find out that it's not true, fill in the blank with any number of these hoaxes. The response is, well, it could have happened there, or, all those things. So talk about when are we going to learn to push the clutch in, let the car drift, do the investigation before we start canceling schools, assigning racist things to an entire, BYU is a giant university. And then also the rejection of the truth that happens with these things.
Two answers. The first one, I noticed both myself and David put in that comment, you always want to give people a chance, this kind of thing. So I think the first is just basic gentlemanliness in a lot of these cases. When you look at who the accusers generally are, even good human nature. The second level, I do think you have to get into political slant in the media. In Hoax, I mentioned that in 2004, it's been replicated once since on a pretty large end scale. But Pew Research surveyed national media members about political opinion, political ideology. And this wasn't the case locally. That's often ignored in right-wing media. But at the national level, 7% of media members were conservative or center-right. You had some moderates, but it was, I believe, the standard questions, leftist, liberal, left-leaning, moderate. That's 93% of the media. So there's obviously the bias I'll say this, the bias would be the same in the other direction if you had 93% Sean Hannity's. To some extent. And we all know that, whatever our political opinions are. If an illegal immigrant was involved in a shooting, that would be on every channel in the same way a black man being shot by the cops is today. But the first story today is real, and it's no more accurate than the story in that hypothetical world. In fact, it's a bit less accurate. So, that's the second part of it. There's a huge demand for racism in the USA right now, not necessarily that much of a supply. So when one of these comes out, you do see CNN, MSNBC running it as yet another example. And this isn't alone. I mentioned Jussie Smollett as a throwaway, but we've also seen the past couple of years, Bubba Wallace, he claimed he found a literal hangman's noose at his NASCAR garage. We've seen that congresswoman who claimed that she was assaulted in a high-end grocery store, told to go back to her filthy home country or something like this. Just these crazy stories over and over. Going back to Duke lacrosse. But Wisconsin Parkside with the nooses found all over campus, Kean College with the death threats to every black student. The data set is still growing. It's at 837 case studies right now. So, I think that one, you want to be kind to people. But when you see one of these big cinematic stories, there also is that urge to kind of get on top of this to some extent and run that story and say, well, see, here's what we've been talking about. You're accusing us of just lying and making stuff up. But no, there it is. This beautiful Duke athlete was hit with the N-bomb right there on the court. And again, BYU, David, you went to BYU, right?
His name's Ryan, by the way.
Ryan.
Oh, Ryan,
okay.
yes.
Yes,
sir, I did.
Livermore.
I did.
Oh, no, David Livermore was last week.
Oh, okay. I apologize for that. I've been calling you David pretty consistently. No, I did. I looked up the bio for the guy I've got here. Did you? Okay. Anyway, well, my bad, Ryan.
No worries.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now I know who you are. Pleasant to be introduced. Okay. But no. So That's actually kind of funny. But okay, but you went to BYU, right?
I did. Yes.
Yeah, I think BYU, you might kind of fill in some of this, but BYU would be almost an irresistible target for someone who's in the anchor role on CNN. I mean, it's a Mormon school. It's out there in a red state. I mean, it's sort of the heartland of the enemy. It's a religious institution. So it's very easy to believe that they would do that. And in reality, whether or not you like BYU or Notre Dame, I mean, I went to almost the opposite. I mean, an MVC and then a Big Ten party school. But I mean, whether or not you like those sort of institutions, I would say that's much less likely there. That like rowdy, drunk students would be chanting insults at the opposition. We actually saw the exact reverse, right? Recently with the, fuck the Mormons chant. University of Oregon, they had a 100 fraternity men, all races. F the Mormons. They had like a drum. So I mean, like there's a difference, but that's my last sentence. But there's a difference between the fantasy, which is the one guy at white evil BYU, and the reality, which is the 100 jocks of every race with a drummer actually chanting this about the LDS faith. And I mean, nothing's going to happen there.
No, 100% correct, Will. And we, as I've attended games, both home games and away games, and I've seen the chants. I saw a BYU game up at the University of Washington where we saw it. I've seen some down here in Florida, where I currently live, where that is that's a common refrain at some of these games. And I will say, to our credit, most BYU fans ignore it. We're used to it. We just let it roll off our backs. But the thought of that happening in reverse, I've been in LaVell Edwards Stadium, 65,000 students. It gets loud, it gets obnoxious, but there might be a handful of obscenities in that entire stadium, and certainly nothing racial, for all the reasons I mentioned before, right? It would be for your average BYU student, it would be a clear violation of the honor code, which again, every BYU student voluntarily accepts this code of conduct, and they agree to live by that. And they understand that if you violate this code of conduct, there are sanctions that the university can and will take against you, up into including expulsion from the university. So something like yelling a racial epithet and having, corroborating evidence and witnesses that saw you do that could be grounds for expulsion from BYU. I just don't, no student there would risk that. It just wouldn't, in my view, it just wouldn't happen in a crowded stadium like that. So I never saw it. I never saw it once.
I thought I'd jump into here and just ask about, well, let me ask this too. So you get all the initial pushback, right? Obviously this is a thing that if it happened, we would en masse just reject it. That's not what we do. But you get a guy like former NAACP president Cornell William Brooks goes live on CNN and he, denounces all of BYU. This seems like by now we should say, you know what? I'm not going to comment on that until the investigation is complete. And then if it's true, I will be glad to bash these guys, But why would somebody who, look, he's not doing it now, but here's the person from the NAACP and he doesn't have any restraint. I mean, that would compromise my integrity, and I wouldn't want to do that. I'm positive I compromise my integrity on my own enough, but I wouldn't take the bait and go on CNN or MSNBC or any media outlet until we actually knew if this actually happened. Why do we crave this stuff so much, Will?
I mean, if that one's for me, money. I mean, one of the things you have to understand about the media, and I think both of you gentlemen do understand this, but television is an ad sales vehicle to some extent. I mean, in fact, 100%. We're not talking about the news division being broken off from the rest of the enterprise, Barbara Walters interviewing Yasser Arafat style and allowed to not make money. I mean, when you look at, I'm pretty friendly with some of the people at Fox, even in a casual way with some of the people that have worked for CNN. And I mean, those guys are, to some extent, I mean, Tucker Carlson has a huge audience. Don Lemon has a huge audience. Both those guys are actually solid enough newsmen. I like Tucker personally, but the goal is to bring eyes to the screen to some extent. And I mean, there are massive advertisers on these players. Ford Trucks, I think, is still on CNN. So, I mean, if you have what could be a scoop story, you're the first to break this claim that this Duke innocent was abused by these Mormon savages. I mean, that's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that's why you do that. One of the things that's great about internet citizen journalism actually is, I mean, you can make a good living and all that, but you also, I mean, you're sort of a smart guy with a computer. Like, you can wait a little bit, and we can do these long forms where we can talk for an hour and a half with scholars and reporters and, pretty serious people. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm much more inclined to pay attention to a range of people across the aisle, from really Chapo Trap House to Ben Shapiro, when it comes to some of these issues, as silly as that might sound, than I would be to the primetime news at this point. Because the news is basically these flicker stories. It's like everything that could happen. So right now, I mean, like, the Bexar County Sheriff is threatening to sue the governor of Florida for transshipment of migrants. As a lawyer by background, I'm not even sure he can. But that's a big story because he's saying it. So that runs. And then, like, Michael Avenatti, remember him? Like, 4 months later, when nothing comes out of this, it'll be forgotten and it'll be on to the next. And that's true across televised media.
Brian, I don't want to ask all the questions. I know you might have some for Will, as a BYU and everything.
I appreciate what Will, what you just said. And I do understand sort of the business motivations here, particularly the big media companies wanting to get those clicks. And the news business has been suffering for years, right? With social media competing and online news sources. It's a rough and tumble business. So I get that part of it. What is it about us, though, that clicks on those links? What is it about the American society that has this appetite? You mentioned demand for racism exceeds the supply. Why is that, Will? Why is that?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, so the simple reason for that, I'll open with a comment that I once heard from a mentor of mine who's a Black businessman and preacher. But his comment was, the toughest time for an activist movement that used to do some good, and I think he was subtly referring to, for example, the NAACP, is after they win. So, I mean, when you look at Black civil rights in the USA, we've had full integration of the schools, at least, de jure, since 1954. We've had, the Civil Rights Act, racial discrimination is civilly, usually criminally illegal. That, again, is 1964. Pro-minority affirmative action, whether or not, I mean, even if you don't think the first two things worked, anti-merit pro-minority admissions policies in every Fortune 500 company, major university since 67. I mean, Nixon's Philadelphia plan. A lot of the U's were already doing this beforehand. So when you look at what's the mission for Black civil rights today, the reason a lot of these guys like Sean King or Patrice Cullors seem like grifters is that, in my opinion, they are. I mean, there's not really anything to fight for. There's no anti-lynching law that's needed. So, I mean, for me, the issue with this race stuff is that you have the whole apparatus that existed during the civil rights movement. Whether you're talking about the major organizations like the SPLC or the ADL, if you're talking about Jewish American rights, I mean, you have the same level of bias in the media. I mean, now you're getting a lot of this in the curriculum with the Ibram Kendis, the Robin DiAngelos, but racism itself, like the boogeyman they're training you to fight, has declined about 92% since the late 1960s, like in the modern era. Right now, only about 6% of whites, only about 10% of Blacks test as bigots. I wouldn't date someone of another race, for example, the basic quant stuff. So if you are arguing that there is a near genocide of Black people going on, and that's the basis for your fundraising, and that's no hyperbole. I mean, Benjamin Crump published a very successful book about 2 years ago now called Open Season, The Legalized Genocide of Us Colored People. And when I looked at this, I thought it was a joke, like a satire from Matt Walsh or something, but it's literally every sort of incident of anti-white or white anti-Black violence, or the water stops running in a particular city, so on, that he could put together. And if you want to advance that narrative to get money, you need to find examples of racial prejudice. The problem is that the actual number of examples of racial prejudice is down 92%. Last sentence, but interracial crime, for example, the thing that's really brought up a lot here, Dylan Roof, George Zimmerman, so on, first of all, is about 3% of serious crime, Black versus white interracial crime. about 600,000 incidents a year. There are about 20 million index crimes. And what does take place is 80% black on white. So it's really hard to actually look at those figures and pull the narrative out of them. So sometimes you have to make stuff up, frankly. I mean, these questionable stories become, most of the modern narrative is based on beliefs that are false and stories that are false, I think is a simple way to put that. But the need for real racism exists for a lot of people. I sincerely believe that. I think it's obviously mathematically true.
You're talking about numbers and fact and, decades of social science research, across a variety of sources. But we live in a time where, two experts can sit across each other and point counterpoint. I literally watched two left-leaning guys talk about forest management on the news in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And one guy said, you have to clear fallen trees. And the other guy, both PhDs, both experts in this field. And he said, no, you have to leave the fallen trees as fire breaks. And so these guys, they're doing this some more here. They can't even agree on the thing that they're both experts on. So when you cite these numbers, give us some veracity to them, because it's easy to say, this stuff doesn't exist. But then you get into the whole lived experience thing. And then there are indications of racism.
Well, sure. But I mean, I think there's a big role. So someone's lived experience or their truth is really just their opinion. A very old saying, everyone's got an opinion, etc. We really can look at hard numbers. Like, we know the crime rate. Every police department in the country, at least theoretically, and the majority of them do, all of them in big cities do, reports index crime data to the FBI every year. And if you somehow think, well, the cops could be making this up, they could be burying black bodies in the woods, the kind of crazy stuff you do sometimes here at neighborhood meetings, there's another project, the BJS, the Bureau of Justice Statistics Annual Crime Report, where they contact something like 300,000 people every year, and usually with same race interviewers, ask them about their experiences with crime. So the crime rate is the most reliable social science data probably that we have. I mean, the black crime rate is about 2.4 times the white crime rate, so on down the line. So we know that. If you're saying, well, the white crime rate is 5 times the black crime rate, it's not. There's not really a need for more of a response than that. I think the big problem is that it's not doesn't get heard very often.
Another thought, or probably actually another question, Will, for you. It goes back to this idea of demand for racism, but and I don't know how closely you followed the response of BYU when the allegations first broke, and I've been public on Twitter, sort of my disappointment with how the university responded to this. I'm pleased that they did a full investigation. I 100% am glad that they investigated this. They allowed their journalism students to do a full investigation. So that part of it, I was absolutely 100% behind. But if memory serves, I think the athletic director came out, on social media and within the news media and said, we're so sorry for this, sort of almost an admission of guilt prior to, as part of the response. And we're going to get to the bottom of this and some other things. And they were almost starting to do some retraining for students. It seemed like we're going to set everybody down and have a talk about why we don't say things like this. I was disappointed to see that before the investigation had completed. But could you speak to a little bit, how should an entity like a university or a corporation or maybe even a private individual respond to allegations like this? You're almost guilty before you have a chance to do the investigation. Did BYU do the right thing by sort of coming out and almost admitting guilt and then allowing investigation go? Or should they have said, these are serious allegations, this is an investigation, we'll come out with a statement after? How should they respond?
Yeah, I agree with you on this point. One of the problems that we run into with these hate hoaxes is, in my opinion, but I think the data obviously shows this kind of institutional reluctance to say that they were hate hoaxes. So, I mean, there's a case that comes to mind that's also on a sort of a left-leaning college campus, much more so than BYU. But at the University of Wisconsin, a young woman named Althea Bernstein said that a group of UWIS fraternity men pulled up next to her car, which was stopped at a light. They squirted her with something from a water bottle, presumably, gasoline, petrol, something like that. and they tried to set her on fire by throwing a lit lighter into the car. And this was a hate crime. And this became a national story. I mean, athletes in the NFL, when they were allowed to pick things for their jerseys, different names and tags and so on, could pick the tag or ride with Bernstein, referring to Althea Bernstein. And it turned out that this was just complete BS. I mean, there was a camera on the light pole right where Ms. Bernstein was paused in her car. It saw nothing. There's certainly no fight between groups of students. There was no attempt to set a black woman on fire. Bernstein's black and Jewish. And this just went on and on. It turned out that she was probably on tape as one of the students who were involved in a riot earlier that day. If I recall, this was sort of the summer of Floyd. People were spraying buildings with lighter fluid and setting, lovely areas of the campus ablaze. So this person was, in all probability, and I'll say this in public, a criminal who just made up this lie. And everyone was very reluctant to say that. People kept saying things like the footage is non-determinative. And it's kind of the same thing here, where the student paper, the local paper, the police all went through. And I get the impression that if you look at the size of a volleyball arena, they probably interviewed 1 in 10 people there. I mean, they were pulling cell phone video. I mean, they were doing this in very intense investigation of this, and they found nothing at all. Like, the person accused by the Duke volleyball player, who was originally banned from all BYU athletics, was some poor mentally challenged guy who was just a fan of the team. So I think to say something like, we continue to believe Miss X, no one would make something like this up, but we've been unable to confirm the allegations. No, I think that's the absolute worst way to handle this. I don't know if I'd say lie or prompt a court case, but I would just say no evidence of this has been found. This comes in the context of many similar investigations. I absolutely would not apologize for BYU because BYU didn't do anything. Wisconsin didn't do anything. These are hoaxes.
Yeah, a follow-up to that. So I agree with you. I appreciate the answer. I've always felt I've had a couple of corporate communication roles in my career, and one of the, fortunately, I've never had to deal with anything like this or of this magnitude, but we've had sort of bad business news, and how do you deal with sharing bad information to the public? And I felt like, and I appreciate your answer, because I felt like BYU I think they mishandled this. It feels like to me they mishandled it. They gave too much oxygen to the allegations before they had done the complete investigation. And I'm pleased that they did it. And I don't think BYU will ever accuse the Duke player of lying. I just don't think they'll go that far. But I appreciate where you drew the line, sort of like, well, we can find no evidence here of this happening. Interestingly enough, Duke responded also to the allegation in support of their player, and South Carolina canceled a game against BYU a week after in support of the Duke player. I'd be interested to get your take. What should Duke's response been? And what do you think about the South Carolina team canceling a match with BYU over the allegations? Oh, you're on.
Sorry, I had that on mute. I think the South Carolina allegation response is completely ridiculous. So that's Coach Dawn Staley, who I've always kind of liked, to the extent I follow the women's game at all. But I mean, her comment is she didn't want to bring her players into a hostile, racialized environment. I mean, this was deep. She said the team had talks about this issue and so on. I mean, I've got to say, like, I was an athlete in high school, although, I'm average. My best sport is actually middle distance running. But I mean, like, people said all kind of crazy stuff at events. I mean, in Chicago in the 90s, people would chant things like, I smell, let's say, vagina, if your team looked a bit soft. I mean, people would throw things on the court. The idea that it's a national story, a good friend of mine, Marcus Jackson, I don't think we're ever on a varsity team at the same time, but we played things like Park League basketball together. He's very dark-skinned, I'm very light-skinned, and audiences would jokingly nickname us Sunshine and Midnight. And the white players on our team, Irish, Italian kids, whatever, would hear similar things. So the idea that if a drunk fan yells the N-word 5 times, this should be a national story, I think first is ridiculous. So even if this had happened, if the school says we apologize for the behavior of our fans, that's it. There's no reason to cancel what was probably a $100,000 game on one end or the other. I mean, a cross-country flight because of this type of thing. But to continue that after it turned out this didn't happen just doesn't make any sense at all. So I mean, for Staley, hopefully, to the extent people do follow women's basketball, South Carolina, which recently won the Natty, and BYU are both pretty significant players. I mean, hopefully fans will get on the coaches, get on the AD, and resurrect that series, which has been played before. That's the only comment there. In terms of the reaction from Duke, that is actually a tougher leadership decision. Because, I mean, obviously, if you're the AD at Duke, you're the AD at Duke. First of all, I can't think of a worse job. I mean, it's easy to make fun of Duke. But, I mean, but if you're the AD at Duke, you can't just say, well, we have a lot of spoiled upper-class kids here, including our black students. This is one of many lies that have happened on campus. Look at the lacrosse scandal. This keeps embarrassing us. You would probably – what I would do is just say we're awaiting the outcome of the process. We trust college athletics. We trust our counterparts at BYU. We may personally continue to believe our player, but we await the outcome of the investigation. Just that kind of rote nonsense. If I were Duke, I wouldn't say, yes, I think one of our athletes is lying, because that opens up a whole rabbit hole. I mean, is she going to keep her scholarship? Are you then liable for lawsuits? But definitely don't say things like, we continue to reprimand our opponent for the hate attack that happened in this room full of people that all know it didn't happen. It never happened.
Yeah, there's a lot of these kind of quotes too, where we're hearing like, but look, the coach you mentioned earlier, her name is escaping me at the moment. Now that she knows that this didn't happen, she's like, yeah, but I'm still standing by my statement. Instead of like gracefully walking back, the same thing, about what's her name, Nina King from Duke. She talks about like the power of the women there and everything else, and we unequivocally, is her quote, we unequivocally stand and champion them, especially when their character is called into question. And then I'll do end quotes there. Okay, well, now she's compromised her character, which by this policy compromises the character of every woman on this team. I mean, these things have to be dealt with. We understand that, okay, it's a hoax and who knows why, and really ultimately who cares? But how long do we tolerate this as like, no harm, no foul, when there actually is harm? And there are thousands, tens of thousands, 1 million people that are always going to believe that BYU did this in spite of all the facts. Just like all the people that believe the Covington kids are a bunch of racist assholes, and that the Duke lacrosse team, and on and on and on, that these things actually happened. The Bubba Wallace story, like that actually was a noose, even though the FBI said it wasn't a noose. Should there be culpability? Is there anything criminal here?
My personal opinion, I'm actually very unsympathetic in these situations. I think so. If the Bexar County Sheriff is going to nonsensically claim that he's suing the governor of Florida for human trafficking, I would have no problem at all with, someone in Provo, is it, filing some kind of symbolic, if she comes back here, we're going to at very least sit her for questioning and a possible falsified police report case or something like that. I mean, I don't know how formal the process was originally. I would assume there was a report here with either the university or the local PD. Again, would that ever play out in practice? I mean, a Utah warrant against, an athlete at a top 20 university, I don't know. But in general, I'm pretty unsympathetic to people that falsify hate crimes. I mean, I think Jussie Smollett should be in prison. And this isn't the way I feel about a lot of things, drug offenses or sex work. But I mean, one of the remarkable things that we've seen in the USA over the past couple of years is that the racial climate has gotten worse for no real reason at all. Like, we haven't seen any actual decreases in interracial dating. We haven't seen any actual increases in police violence, or decreases in it, really. Black Lives Matter didn't accomplish much of anything statistically. But I mean, the percentage of black people that think race relations are good has gone from like 75 to 37. Whites is down to 43. So I think a lot of that is because of the constant media coverage of these cases. You can't turn on a TV network, certainly not one with a guilty Caucasian wine mom audience, without seeing these stories like two people were burnt. First of all, I don't know if bird watching is what people are doing in the Central Park Ramble, but two people are out there, they're watching birds, and they get into a fight over dogs, and this is a national story, on and on, Jussie and Bubba. So yes, I think when people do this, they should be punished. I think that BYU should have issued a very strong statement. I would support it if the police did something in that city. And in general, when things are better known even than they are in this case, yeah, I think you should press criminal charges. false report is a crime, something like that.
And is there maybe a civil case here? Could BYU drop a case on South Carolina or their AD or the coach or all of them and say, hey, you can't go around doing this. We're a national brand. You've libeled us legitimately now. And I know libel's hard to prove, but hey, we're going to go to court. We're going to establish this thing. And it seems at some point somebody has to start to say, I better not do this, because I'll tell you right now, someone named Rachel Robinson makes a false claim, which is as ironic as it is, because the real Rachel Robinson's still around 100 years later, who actually went through this stuff for real. And you get LeBron James tweeting, and supporting this thing and amplifying it. All right, we're going to slap a lawsuit on LeBron James too. It may not go anywhere, but we can't just jump on these things and run with them before we even take 5 minutes to allow an investigation. And we're not talking an unrealistic amount of time. It's not even been a month since this thing happened, and the case has been wrapped up for 2 weeks.
Well, I mean, you probably couldn't sue Dawn Staley, who said something along the lines of, we've had talks, not going to say much, but I'm not bringing my team into a potentially hostile environment. I mean, there's not really a crime there. I think in terms of the broader point, could you sue some of these people for libel? Yeah. Like anyone who said something along the lines of, well, you could have predicted this. I'd expect no better from those Mormons out there, that racist university. I mean, scroll through Twitter. Yes, anyone who said Mormons, racist, we know this happened. This has happened before. Yeah, libel and slander are just variations on defamation, which is making a public false claim that causes damage. So like LeBron is a guy who's done this a couple of times. I'm amazed he hasn't caught a case, quote unquote. I mean, he's defamed, in my opinion, police officers. He's posted pictures of cops with their badges on. So, yeah, if he says something like, I stand with Rachel Robinson, we all know what happened at dirty BYU, then yes, I do think that sending at least, a symbolic set of papers over there is a good idea. And this, by the way, I think that this in general is how wokeness is going to be ended. Like the whole oppression is everywhere. Yeah, from the gender ideology, don't criticize the transing of kids stuff, to our institution is institutionally racist. I think people are going to have to start suing. I mean, so with the trans issue, which is unrelated to this, but people are going to have to start saying, whether or not some people have medical gender dysphoria, I'm sure some do. My daughter doesn't. She was misdiagnosed by your clinic, and we're suing you for $50 million. That's $1 million for every adult year when she'll never be able to have a child. And I mean, that 2 of those lawsuits is going to bankrupt even Cleveland Clinic. I mean, that's what's going to do it. Same thing with these hate crime hoaxes. If every time, I think you guys have hit on it. If every time one of these happens, do what Media Matters does. Watch CNN, watch MSNBC word for word. And every time a host says racist BYU, add that guy as a defendant to the lawsuit. Yeah, Stephen A. Smith. I mean, send a process server to his house. He went on a 5-minute rant about this, like, BYU, you're dirty now. The fault's on you. You didn't do enough. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't at least symbolically respond, as opposed to these fake apologies.
And ESPN and CNN. Heck, it sounds like what you're saying. What you're saying, Will, is that the 3 of us should start a law firm and process and encourage the lawsuits of people who do slander and libelous things. And even if we're just going to Discovery a bunch and catching a bunch of checks, we're going to at least make it expensive and painful, because it is not painful enough, right? Justice Smollett, maybe, I don't know if he even served any actual time. And look, ultimately, he gets a sentence. It gets, all right, that's fine. That's how the system works. And maybe Hollywood will punish him. But, man, he put us through a lot, And so, yeah, I'm gonna start a firm that's going to be Reilly, Ryan, and Turner. And we're going to go out there and start dropping some paper. Ryan, I know you got to go. I want to give you a chance to engage before you have to punch out.
Well, I appreciate it. And Will, it's great to finally meet you. Long-time follower, first time we've had a discussion, but great to meet you today. Appreciate your thoughts on this. My last question was sort of, how do we solve this? And, I think it's an interesting... I agree with what you said. I think there's going to have to be some penalty, some cost associated with promulgating these sort of hate hoaxes to get it to stop. Otherwise, the economic formula is all in the favor of going ahead and publishing these things, right? The news media is going to run with it for clicks, and and the folks that make money off of agitating society and worsening race relations so that they can earn a living, the grifters, I think, continue to win in any scenario absent of that. So, Will, I appreciate your comments there. It's interesting because it's sort of where I was headed with the whole BYU response, which was, BYU immediately jumped to, hey, we're guilty of something here before there was an investigation. And I think we have to, we've got to reject that response. I think anyone accused of that, or any entity accused of this type of hate, needs to step back and say, we're going to do a full investigation. We're going to take this very seriously, but ultimately we're going to come out and publicize the results of our investigation. And if we find that this was a hoax perpetrated on purpose, we're going to take action. We're going to take the opposite reaction to it. And I don't think BYU will do that. That's sort of not in our nature or response. As a religious organization, that's not something I see happening. But I do think that's probably how we get this thing to stop. The last thing I'll say is I hope we get better. The stats you threw out about the worsening of race relations, it sort of hurts me to the core, Will, to think that as a nation we're being ripped apart by these grifters. And there's no need for it. There's no need for it. We should be more united. We can disagree on politics, but I think in general Americans are good, and we don't look at our immutable characteristics and say, I hate that person because they look different than me. I just don't think Americans in general are like that. And it's really painful to hear that we're being pushed in that direction by these grifters. So I hope people will stand up. I hope people will stand up, and I hope people will make this a costly. These hoaxes need to cost the perpetrators dearly.
Yep.
So,
couldn't agree more.
When we look at the Oregon side of the equation, and we look at the hate towards certain religions, and certainly the Mormon faith is targeted quite often. Are these hate crimes, or is this just rowdy students? Because at some point you got to let students be rowdy. But if you chanted, "Fuck the Seminoles," "Fuck the trans people," "Fuck the black people," whatever it is, I think the response would be, and maybe appropriately so, different.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about that. If a crowd was playing against a major, HBCU football player like Florida A&M, and they started chanting even "fuck these Negroes," and this went on for 30, 40 seconds. And again, they had a guy out there with like drumsticks, and they had fraternity guys pumping their fist and doing the college cheer. I mean, that would be the leading national story for 2 weeks. People would probably literally beat their breasts and cry on national television. We would hear incessantly about how this country doesn't value black life and ignores black people and could potentially bring back slavery, something Joe Biden once famously said, and so on down the line, just endlessly. What happened here? So there's no doubt about that. And we've seen cases. This isn't me speculating. I mean, there are people that have done things like rip down trans flags and progress pride flags while doing something like a quote unquote turf or Proud Boy chant, just street fight level stuff. I mean, they've been charged with hate crimes. They're facing 5 to 10 years. And I mean, unfriendly big city prisons is actually where you'd go after a year in the jail. I mean, so there's no doubt about that. I think what we're seeing here is kind of the hidden 90% of the problem. So this, again, I mentioned in passing, I don't think interracial crime is a particularly big deal. I mean, this is a very non-alt position of mine, non-kind of new right. Like, the person most likely to kill you is your ex. Not that I'm alt or new right on most issues, but the person most likely to kill you is your ex-wife. I mean, interracial crime out of index crimes, 3%. But if you're going to talk about it, if you're going to hammer Dylan Roof all day, you have to note at some point, this is actually 83% or whatever it is year by year, black on white. You can't create this. I guess you can if you have, the MSNBC cameras, but you can't ethically create this fictional world where there are mobs of rednecks out here attacking black people, or where the majority of street muggers, like the most common interracial crime is mugging, are white. That doesn't make any sense. That's like claiming the majority of opiate dealers are black. It's just nonsense. Anyone from a big city has seen both. So this again is just a more extreme version. Like the breakdown in violence directed by like diverse frat guys against Mormons versus Mormons against diverse frat guys has to be 99-1. But that direction is never going to be discussed. So again, like what happened with the whole crowd chanting "fuck the Mormons"? Nothing. That's the most remarkable thing about it. I do think Oregon issued some kind of mildly apologetic statement, and good for them. They could have amplified that a little bit. But the whole thing, like as I understand, the BYU team had come out with a flag representing like an Oregon football man that had died in some unfortunate way, and the two teams were shaking hands, like, and the students then just started doing this, and it was almost on par with like bleep the Negroes, and nothing happened. That's the other, like I said, 90% of the story. And until someone starts telling it, a lot of people are going to believe, what Ryan accurately described is these sort of grifting lies. The Sean Kings of the world are still out there.
And there's a Brad's quote from saying that earlier, talking about how they were celebrating the life of an Oregon student who had passed away, and that's the response we get. It's gosh, Ryan, I know you're still here, so if you want to ask something else or say something else, I'll let you go next.
Well, no, I've got to run, but I'm glad we're having this discussion. It's helpful, to sort of look back and look at how the response, response to these hoaxes, how it occurs, the sort of institutional response to this, the media response to this, and it's been an honor to listen to Will sort of talk us through how these things are happening and the impact they're having to society and what's feeding this demand for racism in the media. So I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion today. Thank you. Thanks,
Ryan. Hey, Will, do you sell a lot more books every time these things happen? Hope you're on mute.
Sorry, man. I've been doing that. If I get an email and I don't want a typing noise to come across the line. Podcast with you or with buddies, they certainly help. They move. A dozen or something like that. Mm-hmm. When I do national television, I think that's why book writers are such hoes about TV appearances sometimes. If you do Tucker or Lemon or something like that, you're going to sell 1,000 books. And you're getting, $6-7 per book, whatever the deal is. So, that's the mass movement. But producing steady content is kind of the way to get your name out there. It's kind of like if you're in music, it's a distinction between the albums, the mixtapes, the shows, and so on. Like right. Each book is kind of the album, and then you do the pods and so on down the line. I just like doing this one or co-hosting this one, but each one is productive.
Yeah, it's you found yourself a little niche, because as humans, we just can't resist these super sticky moments. Do you have a sense for, with your research, what happens to these folks, the Tawalis and all the Jussies? How do these people do? Is this a psychosis of some kind? Do they end up continuing to stumble along in life? Do you have an answer for that?
The short answer is most of them do pretty well because nothing ever happens to them. That sounds a little bit glib, but when you talk about these hate crime hoaxes, I would say maybe 1 in 10, 15 leads to some kind of conviction for a crime. One of the things that's interesting about hate crimes is that almost no hate crime cases are closed. So the number of hoaxes that we know exist is actually very substantial. So I've talked to guys on the other side of this issue that I respect, like Barry Levin, and their argument is, well, so you've got a data set of 1,000 of these cases and it's in 5 years, but okay, buddy. There are 7,000 hate crimes reported each year, and we know that's an underreport. What are you talking about? What are you talking about here? 5%, 2%? And I think the response to that is only a subset of the hate crimes are widely reported enough to even make it into my data set. One of the qualifications is that I have a reliable article showing, 1, that the thing happened and was attributed to hate, and 2, that it was almost certainly debunked. And again, how do those numbers directly compare with the set of formally reported FBI hate crimes? That's conference paper stuff. But the reality is that the number of hoaxes is objectively pretty large if you have 7,000 cases per year. And of those cases, I think we found 8.5% or something like that received national media coverage. So, but another point that's worth making is that among the other 90%, let's say, of cases, underselling my estimate, they're not all confirmed serious hoaxes by Nazis, right? I mean, like, there's a California report on this that I still have in a database somewhere, but they found that the closure rate in hate crime cases was 6%.
Wow.
I don't know if that was 6% where they identified a suspect and then tried to pursue, or just 6% where they convicted the guy, but still, that's remarkably low. I mean, that's maybe a third of the rate for rape, which is already really bad. So, I mean, obviously with murder, at least traditionally, the closure rate, you'd want to be pretty close to 100%. Now in some big cities, it's down around 30. But when you see 6, I mean, that tells you, I don't think that anyone's laying down on the job, anything like that. I think that the typical hate crime is like someone scrawls a swastika on a bench. And then people start freaking out about it. And so you have multiple claimants or multiple potential victims or whatever. I mean, every student that saw the swastika will post an image of it to social media, creating this image of a wave of these incidents. But the thing with the original drawing on the bench is that you have no idea who put it there. And I mean, there are really 3 or 4 options. Like, it's a serious neo-Nazi, which is the only one I'd worry about. Like, you have a predator in the community. Same for a black nationalist fist, something like that. Real anti-gay stuff, faggot being said, no offense. But I mean, so that's one. You have a real predator. 2, you have just a prankster, some frat guy or low-level gangbanger was told to do this as part of some initiation ritual, or just did it for fun. He was drunk. And 3rd, you have a hoaxer. And if you have a 94% non-closure rate, in 94% of those cases, you don't know which one it was. So when you look at the people that are caught in hate crime hoaxes, I mean, understand that they're part of a tiny chunk of people involved in hate crime cases who are ever arrested at all. And then that, again, the odds are maybe 5%. That one's an estimate that they are ever going to be prosecuted. So you wind up with a tiny group of people that ever really face any penalties. I'm kind of rambling. Like, Tawana Brawley's a nurse in Virginia. I mean, she's just living a perfectly normal upper middle class life. And apparently every time anyone asks her about her case, she just says some variation on "it happened and I don't want to talk about it." And that's something, by the way, that a lot of these people do. I mean, like, Jussie Smollett has never admitted guilt.
Right.
This is something that's absolutely astonished me. And it was, in fact, why he was sentenced to a few hundred days in jail, really. I mean, he just kept saying, "I know my truth. I know what happened." People would show him video of the Nigerian brothers buying hats and ropes. They were his close boys. And he would say, "Well, I don't know. I don't know what prompted them to attack me." You know, I mean, so it's just, he knows that there's a certain percentage of the black community, white liberal community, that's going to believe the guy from Empire really no matter what he says. So there's nothing strategically for him to gain, in my professional opinion, by saying, "Well, no, I made it all up." Then you look like a clown. Then the paint starts going on. So right now, 50% of people on the left probably, that again is a half-ass percentage. I don't know. A lot of people on the left, even now, still believe that he was a victim, and there's no reason for him to lose that. Right. Robinson has never apologized. She has never said she made it up. I mean, and my understanding is that the police have tried at least phone and email contact saying, "Well, we've interviewed hundreds of students. Like, we now have video footage of the arena, of the entire game. Right. We know what happened." And she's just said, "Well, I heard the word." Yeah. And it's going to be like, well, did someone whisper? You know, black queens know what they heard. Maybe someone said cougar and she thought it was nigger. Like, it's right. Never just going to be, maybe she just made it up on the mainstream left.
Yeah. And then is this an inculcation? You know, like, is there, I just don't get it. Like, you have any student athlete at Duke has an enormous advantage over, I went to a place that doesn't even exist anymore, Cal State Hayward, right? And Cal State system is a fantastic system, but Hayward is not the shining, and now East Bay, it's not the shining light of the state system. I got a degree. I didn't get paid to play sports. None of that happened. You know, it's just like, don't you have enough stuff to do? Why would you take this on? And then, yeah, like, you are risking at some point, hopefully somebody starts suing these people, because she's cost a lot of people a lot of money and gained a lot of positive attention from this. I don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I think with a lot of these cases, I'm actually not as annoyed with her as I am with some of these people who intentionally sought out kind of national celebrity. My understanding is that in this case, what happened is that the volleyball player had a really bad game. If you look at the stats, I don't know how to break out hits and digs and so on, but it was sort of the equivalent of 0.0 rebounds, etc. And I assumed that later she was talking to teammates and she was like, yeah, it was a hostile environment. And BYU does get loud. They're just not profane. And then she threw in, this would be my guess, and I heard someone say some stuff that was really over the line. Girl, what? And then it comes out and this story begins to circulate. And it would have stayed on the team bus prior to the social media era. I mean, people say stuff like that all the time. Like, yeah, boys, my girl broke up with me. I might have a weak one tonight. So I think you're talking about something at that level that was made into a national story by people who have this vested interest in creating victims. I don't think this person is necessarily a victim or a bad person. I don't think that this is going to happen again. I'm sounding more sympathetic than I am, but this is reality. What happened there was, first the story was told, and her aunt became aware of it, and she's running. Yeah, she's running for a position as a very liberal Democratic candidate in, I think, Texas. And she is the one who put it out on social media and said, you say there's no racism, you racist, on my Facebook page. Well, my beloved, niece or whatever, I think you corrected me, was the target of a racial insult last night. And from then on, powerful elected official, it starts going viral. There are a lot of people that are rent seeking off this one made up experience. That's what I would say. Then you start seeing like her parents. It turns out that her dad is something like let's Google this actually, Duke volleyball player dad. He's a very powerful guy.
While you're looking that up, I'm gonna say this about all of that too. One of the things her godmother says, and she wasn't there, was that the police had to go sit on the Duke girls bench. So this is a data point. Like I'm positive BYU talked to this guy and said, did you feel the need? And look, there's always a cop or two at all of these events, if not more security than that. And so maybe it's an off-duty cop working on a contract with his uniform. Who knows, right? But I do know that they're there and that they would absolutely be part of this investigation, because you would want to go to hey, did you hear something, and think, I'm going to have a presence and sit on the bench. If that person, male or female, doesn't matter, if they go and they do that thing, that we would know about this. It would be part of the thing. Any good journalism student would be like, hey, there was a cop there. We've got to go ask that person. They're a public servant. They're going to respond. The fact that if that even happened, the fact that there's nothing that's in the story from that, it just flies in the face of people's judgment if they want to continue to insist that this happened.
Yeah. I mean, so again, whether anything at all happened, like did some obnoxious drunk chant cougars like within the space around the Duke bench you're not supposed to be near, or was there some very mild racial slur used that became nigger? It's impossible to know that without being able to teleport or travel through time. Right. It is worth noting that the original allegations by the godmother more than the player were just nonsensical. It was like every single time an African-American player served, someone loudly yelled nigger there. And that's what made this a national story. Not like I heard a whisper from the corner and then a cop immediately came to our bench. Right. So we know that didn't happen. Like there's no way that could have happened. We now have full like drone video of the whole game. There are cameras in like Pac-12 athletic arenas. By the way, I pulled up the dad, Marvin Richardson, is probably one of the 100 most powerful men in the country. He's the deputy director of the ATF, deputy director of the U.S. Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. So this, again, is one of the issues in these cases. Like, the guy sounds like kind of a badass, actually. But these people that are making these claims are almost invariably upper class. And they're almost invariably people who feel like they should have a lot of experiences with racism, but have had almost no experiences with racism. And like, I'm pretty sure that's causal. Like, I'm pretty sure that these are people that have been told, like, this is how it used to be and still sometimes is. And in fact, went to a well-integrated school and still love their white boyfriend from sophomore year and so on. But use that narrative in what seems to those of us that just grew up in integrated middle-class areas as a weird, forced way.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, it's now less of a surprise that this guy was able to get on primetime CNN so quickly. I mean, that he was able to schedule interviews with so many papers. I mean, he could have some of them shut down. You know, I mean, he's an impressive guy. So the same thing you saw with the Sarah Brash thing. I mean, like we've talked to Sarah Brash on this show.
That's right.
And cool. Yeah, I mean, took a bit to get her out of her shell, but like really cool, like late. I mean, like youngish lawyer. I mean, very far left in practice, but the whole thing with her is that she was a trauma survivor. I don't think she'd mind us noting she'd been through sexual abuse, and she had asked to live in this kind of Hogwarts style room on top of the upper left corner of one of the Yale dormitories, and working class kid by background. And there was a party held by like a well-known Black student organization in the next room. And a confrontation began between her and a bunch of people, one of whom turned out to be a wealthy student from Haiti. I mean, one of whom was from the country of Mali. I mean, I believe was related to the royal family there. I heard that in passing. I haven't verified that right now. But I mean, like, it was these very notable, not at all poor students that got angry that this assault victim was calling them out for making noise. And we've seen this over and over at Oberlin. I mean, these extremely wealthy kids, Smith, are accusing like the dining hall staff of profiling them because they don't have cards. So a secondary level of this is kind of elite, upper class privilege. Like, back home, I am a princess. How dare you speak to me this way? Combined with this perception of how racism is that you get from the media. And it leads to just these ridiculous stories where like the average middle class citizen watching this is like, no, I really doubt that happened. I've never seen anything like that in my life. And I'm not rich. And I don't go to Yale.
Yeah.
Or Duke, thank God.
Yeah. What's interesting about Sarah's case is that there's a lot of hate thrown directly at her. This is again, trauma survivor, and she's been given this accommodation to help her get through school, which there's any number of things that schools do to help someone who needs just a little bit of an accommodation to get through. And that's fantastic. And then there was also, if you remember, there was like this multi-month harassment campaign, her telling of the story, where they continued to be in her living space, not in her actual room, but climbing up the stairs when there's no reason to be up there, kicking her door, all these things because of this whole thing. And then Yale kind of just, they didn't do a very good investigation because they kind of just had to choose between a rock and a hard place, and they chose the other side. And Sarah continues to bear the brunt of that. It's pretty shocking when you think about here is someone who's left leaning. Here is someone who's like got a history of doing things to create justice for Black folks. And then she becomes the target of this through what sounds like is bullying and thuggery by the local student population.
Mike, got to turn that mic on again. Yeah, I mean, so this is one of the weirdest things about all this, and it's what I refer to again as the other 90% principle. Right. So I think there's very little extreme interracial violence in the USA. I'm going to say this again for the guys on the right. That's 3% of index crime involves Black and white interracial violent crime. That just is what it is. 65% roughly of crime against whites committed by whites, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, if we are going to talk about the directions this cuts, it's always poorer against richer. It's always angry group against less angry group. It's almost always liberal against conservative, like young, diverse groups of white and Black kids in cities starting fights. I mean, it's almost never, it's never the dad that comes to the city from the suburbs to get a dinner that's beating people up or dancing on cars. I mean, so at some level, we all know this.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, so we see the same pattern with a lot of these race harassment cases. The people that are claiming to be the victims are, in fact, the offenders. Yeah. A person I would like to talk to with you, actually, is Amy Cooper, who's the person from that New York dog walking case I sort of made fun of earlier. The situation there was that Cooper was in the park just walking her dog, and her dog slipped the leash, or she let the dog go to run for pleasure for a little bit. And this crazy guy comes out of the woods and is like, this is the bird watching portion of the ramble. We don't run dogs in here. Most of the park is a dog run. And Cooper is a little baffled. I mean, strangers don't normally approach you and say these things. The guy apparently genuinely was worried about ground nesting birds. I'm not sure either of them's an evil person. But so the guy, then they have an exchange that goes on for like 5 minutes, acrimonious exchange. And the guy eventually pulls a bunch of dog treats out of his damn backpack and's like, what's going to happen to you and that animal next is something you're not going to like, lady. Like, that's almost a direct quote. And at that point, she says, I'm going to call the cops and say a large black man is threatening me. And she like exaggerated the threat, but it followed this guy threatening her. So, I mean, it's that's almost forgotten in the story, which is presented as this white woman saw a brother in the woods and just decided to accuse him of rape or whatever. That's just complete fantasy. Like, no, they were both out enjoying the legal services of the park. In most areas, you can walk dogs and you can bird watch. He literally threatened to take or kill or whatever her dog. He's got a bunch of fucking dog treats in his bag. He doesn't have a dog. And like, she says, what's up with this nut? I'm going to call the cops. And I'm not even sure she wouldn't have said like a big Mexican, a big white boy. But I mean, she says, I'm going to call the cops and say there's a large, crazy male threatening me. And this edited phone snippet of this conversation became what was seen on, again, news outlets. This was in the New York Times. How many murders are there in New York in a year? I mean, they used to rival Chicago. So, I mean, this is how these stories begin, and you very often see someone who's the bad guy or close made into the hero. And I think at some level that doesn't really surprise anyone. Again, what are the odds of Mormons picking on Black Oregon frat guys as versus the reverse? Like, we all know, you're just not supposed to say it.
Yeah. It's the same thing with the hands up, don't shoot Michael Brown narrative that is again proven false. And let's not forget that his DNA was on the cop's gun. You get into a wrestling match over a cop's gun, you know, you're including yourself into escalation up to and including your death. I mean, that's just how that goes. To say this is hands up, don't shoot is really not only disingenuous, but just flat out a lie. You know, I wanted to ask you, because I do want to beat up on the right a little bit. Fox News makes all its money on saying nobody covered this. Nobody covered this. You know, when the whole, you know, and in their defense, I don't see a big like mea culpa from Stephen Smith or from ESPN corporate. You know, you don't see those things. And I want to ask one other aspect too to cover after this, because I don't need to tie you up with my talking. Back when the Stop Asian Hate thing was hashtagging everywhere, every time I saw numbers, and I don't have access to the numbers that you have, this was not the story that was presented in terms of Asian hate. There actually wasn't that much of it. And when it was there, it tended to be, you know, Black dudes attacking Asian people. So talk a little bit about the Fox News angle of it and what you think about their approach to their news. And then talk about the Asian hate hashtag era.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I actually am pretty sympathetic to Fox in terms of why they do that. What you have to understand is, again, when we talk about the media leaning 93% to 7% left versus right, that's Pew 2004 major statistical survey. I'm not making that up or exaggerating that. That's Fox is the conservative outlet. I guess you have OAN and Newsmax. They go a little too far for me. They do some good reporting. But I mean, all the rest of the media, MSNBC, CNN, but also, I mean, certainly all the opinion programming on CBS, NBC, most of the time ABC, New York Times, Washington Post, virtually every major news magazine. I mean, BuzzFeed, Daily Beast, Pod Save America, Bitch, Bust, Jacobin, Jezebel, The Root, The Griot. I mean, that's the 93%. So when Fox says something like, it seems pretty outrageous that the president's son is addicted to crack and he's having sex with potentially trafficked Russian hookers using his dad's credit card. This is all true, by the way. Why isn't anyone covering this? It's like, okay, Sean, I get what you're doing, but still, there is an element of sympathy there. Like, of course, it's a political play from, you know, Hannity, so on down the line, but at the same time, it also is true. Like, it's worth mentioning that sentence again. Of course, we don't know if every girl at a Russian agency is trafficked. Most probably are not, but and Hunter hasn't been charged with that. It's important that we are fair in the long form space, God damn it. But yeah. I mean, it's absolutely amazing that the president's son is a crackhead. He's like 50. And he's been traveling around the world closing 6- and 7-figure business deals that his dad obviously knows about. He's been on like Air Force 2. And he's doing stuff like openly having threesomes with prostitutes while weighing ounces of crack. Like, I've watched the videos from the laptop. They're all on Reddit. They're all on 4chan. They're all on WikiLeaks. You know, be careful on the first two. Oh, be careful on all of them. use Tor. But anyway, all caveats and bullshit aside, that is a remarkably notable story. The president's son is a drug addict and potentially drug dealer if he has ounces of crack, who is consorting daily with prostitutes, many from foreign lands, while closing $1 million plus business deals that his dad knows about. So when Fox says only we cover this, that's actually a pretty fair claim. It would be as if Fox totally refused to cover police shootings at all, as opposed to minimizing them by whatever percent. And only MSNBC of all the networks had covered the George Floyd killing. Like that's an accurate comparison. And again, when you think 93 versus 7, that's what coverage would look like in reverse world. Like in reverse world, George Floyd would probably be as big of a story as, say, Dylan Noble. You might ask, who? White guy who was horribly killed by the police. That's who? Or Hunter Biden, or any of 100 other stories that the right wing kind of desperately tries to throw out there that are real stories. So I'm not unsympathetic to my boys at Fox. It's, it sucks being outnumbered 12-1. I think they do a pretty good job. It's the same thing on Facebook when people say, well, of the top 10 outlets that people access, 7 are conservative. And it's, good job to the Daily Wire, Daily Caller, so on. But like, what are the next 100? Yeah. Because I would assume Chapo Trap House, again, BuzzFeed, all the feminist stuff, Bust, just going on down the line. Vox. I would assume all those Chapo Trap House, Union Thugs, Occupy Democrats. I would assume the entire next tier is witty guys on the left wing, the serfs. So it's kind of bullshit to say, well, we've tried to set the terms for our site or our network such that there are no conservatives. So people are watching the one conservative that exists on the other network. Yeah, that's not all that surprising. This whole idea, though, about you could call it, and I do, the curation of information. Yeah. You're not watching what's going on in the news, Barbara Walters style anymore. There are 4 programs. You can pick your favorite. They all clip from the headlines of a relatively unbiased newspaper. Instead, you're watching information that's curated from a massive fire hose deluge of information by people that are really, really partisan. So, on one network, you hardly see certain things at all. On another, you see them all the time. But this accounts for, kind of slowing down here a little bit, virtually all of the obvious gaps in coverage that general quants and former officers and NCOs from the military and business analysts and the think tank boys point out when they look at the media and social science. It's not that no one has said this. It's that very few people in sociology have said this, because about half of sociologists are communists. So, the field slants so far over here that these critiques are not going to be made. But this curational critique, if you will, is really obvious. So with Stop Asian Hate really took off because this sympathetic immigrant minority from countries that the left loves to weeaboo about, like Japan and Korea, was being abused. Then we saw who was abusing them. Yeah. Like blacks in rural areas, some Latino, or blacks in urban areas, some Latinos, even natives in rural areas. The whites were all kind of like white, trashy guys that you're at least supposed to be sympathetic toward when it comes to healthcare and so on. There were no neo-Nazis. There are no Proud Boys. The Proud Boys, by the way, aren't racist at all or really integrated. Leaders of Black Cuban, like they've been wildly slandered, So that is what it is. You stop seeing that Stop Asian Hate hashtag real quick because it's hard. It's easy to post a video of Stop Asian Hate if you can find the one where a MAGA hat guy punches out an Asian. But what do you do when your conservative buddies from the old team or the old unit or whatever then start posting the next 50 underneath it? And they're all these dreadlocked black dudes in big cities getting in fistfights with Asian merchants. You can say some of the merchants provoke them, so on, but it's very obvious what the pattern is. So if you're insistent on denial, you have to cut off coverage of the pattern.
There's 2 things I want to say. I want to go back to Hunter Biden, and this is me talking, as a spy, right? If I know that the son of the president of the United States is a whoring, crack dealing junkie, believe me, I'm going to be on it, and I'm going to task out my field people. And not only am I going to compromise that motherfucker, if at all possible, and let's be honest, that's possible. I'm also going to go after the old man, and it's a legitimate counterintelligence threat to have someone like that so closely tied to the family. Like if I had that son and I wanted to maintain my clearance and go out and do counterintelligence work, I promise you I'd have to account for what was going on. And if there was massive amounts of money flowing in and out of accounts of my family, it would be hard for me to account for that and hard to keep my clearance. Now, I'm just Pete. I'm just no guy. But I'm telling you right now, the guy who looks like me from another country, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, any of the stands you want, Iran, anywhere that we let in, hey, come on in, student visa, come on in. I promise those guys are tasked to go after that dude and go get anything they can and leverage deals and everything else out of it. That is not a fantasy. That is not a conspiracy theory. It's a fact. You look for those exact people. He's completely compromisable. And I'll just leave that with that. And then the other thing about the Asian hate thing is when you watch the integrity bleed out of a reporter who's like, you see in the video, an Asian man is absolutely cold cocked by a gentleman wearing a puffy jacket. We're not really sure what the reason was. And they like completely like dance around the fact that, you mean the black guy that just absolutely walloped this Asian dude, and you're telling me Asian hate is about white people. That's fine. I believe you, but you can't even identify who this person is. It's like when the probably by name or by appearance Islamic person does something that's very jihadist, and they're like, well, I don't know what the motivation is. And they won't even release the guy's name because it'll be a name that is, Islamic. They'll dance around these facts so that you're like, but I don't want to jump to conclusions, but this is a data point on this case. Like the guy's name is, Ali Muhammad, oh, and it turns out he goes to this mosque. Oh, it turns out that mosque is a radical mosque. Oh, and on and on and on. And I'm not saying that all Muslim people are like that, but you can't look people straight in the camera lens and say, I'm here to be truthful when you dance around facts that are relevant to the case.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely and obviously correct. I mean, so when I talk about people writing these books that just compile every case of, white on black violence, a la Ben Crump. I mean, there are some equivalents on the right, like no hate for this guy. In fact, RIP, as I understand. But Colin Flaherty did this with White Girl Bleed a Lot. He just took every case of black on white mob violence. I mean, I've looked through the police scanner. He didn't miss many. Pretty good reporter. But he took them and he put them in a book and he sold it to people. And he said, this is an epidemic, this black on white violence. And again, as I've said, that's factually not true. But at the same time, he had a point that this just wasn't covered. Like the unifying thing in virtually every downtown urban flash mob I could ever think of is that it's like more than 65% black kids, often 100%. And he just points that out. And he's like, there's no real reason not to say this, just as there's no real reason not to say, for example, that crime at raves, which are rife with sexual assaults and drug sales and so on, is mostly committed by white kids. It's just there's this weird, we use all these other terms. So like every urban American kind of knows that teens means black folks between like 12 and 26. And there are all these other labels, like a new one that dropped was a woman attacked and raped by a stranger. And it was, again, the same kind of thing. It's like train station in Harlem. And as a successful black man, there's no real reason to do this. There are plenty of white and Spanish criminal suspects. Just say suspect was an African-American male, But the idea is that you don't want to promote bigotry. You don't want to promote cynicism. The problem is, whatever the effect on bigotry, you're dramatically promoting cynicism by doing this.
Yeah.
Every time someone reads about an attack by teens, again, 35% or whatever of which may well have been committed by diverse groups or by whites, they're going to say, oh, I don't even know what that is. Oh, they're at it again down by the Riverwalk. So you're not really hiding anything from anybody. You're making intelligent people distrust the mainstream news sources. And this just goes on and on and on. And there are all these techniques. One of them is non-reporting. So I noticed that one of the commenters who I think we've both engaged with before said another thing they do is claim some kind of mental health issue. Yeah. Like either that this person was driven not by Islam, but by lunacy in the Muslim cases. To some extent, that's true. By the way, I will say any mass shooter is crazy as a loon. That's the one thing they all have in common. When people are like, they have no unifying characteristics. Yeah, they do. They're all male. They're all fatherless. They're all on SSRI drugs, and they're all crazy. Like all of those correlate at more than 0.9 with being a mass shooter across whites, blacks, Arabs. So I don't really see why we keep playing this game here. But yeah, we definitely do see that more when it's someone from kind of a sympathetic group. Like, let's not blame him. The big game here, of course, is let's not blame his people. So even after 9/11, even George W. Bush, this simmy ass kicking Texas guy walked around in a cowboy hat, said, well, we don't want to pin this on Islam or even radical Islam. I mean, this isn't most Muslims. These are almost word for word quotes. This is Al Qaeda. This is the enemy. This is jihadists. And there's some truth to that. But you definitely don't get that the other way around. Like, if white Trump supporters who were highly tied into like the post-Limbaugh right-wing blogosphere killed hundreds of people in the USA on a particular date. And you're not talking about pre-social media Oklahoma City, but tomorrow there would be no doubt at all that the president would give another like red backlit speech looking like he was about to declare the end of the Galactic Senate, and to condemn this, the MAGA Republicans, we hear this all the time. So I guess my point is there's no reason not to be honest across groups. White people are more likely to kill themselves than black people and to use hard drugs. Black people are more likely to commit homicides and robberies than white people. Most illegal immigrants are Latino. All Arab terrorists are Arab. There's no particular reason not to say groups have different pathologies, and I respond to that by opposing crime, which is almost word for word what I would say. That might be a tweet or something like that, an opening of an academic article. But that's not what the media does today, and people notice.
Well, listen, I've had you for a long time, and I appreciate it. It's always wonderful to talk to you. And these aren't easy topics, but I like that we can have these conversations because, well, if we don't have it, we'll leave it up to CNN and Fox to kind of 7-minute, interviews sort it out for us, and that's a bunch of bullshit. So I appreciate your time and your intelligence and everything else. Anything in closing before I wrap this thing up?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the commenter, Renovatio here, is saying a lot of what we've been saying. And I'll actually close with some of this. Yeah. Hiding obvious facts from people, and this is to some extent his line as much as mine, is a great way to make people distrust the experts. And right now we're in a period of mass distrust for experts that has been wholly earned. Under COVID-19, I mean, we regularly saw very prominent national figures like Dr. Fauci just lie. Yeah. I mean, like non-N95 masks do not work to stop the spread of respiratory viruses. They just don't. Like, we've both been in dangerous environments, yours more so than mine. This has been known for 20, 30 years.
A long time.
Yeah, like people would just say crap like, take that diaper off your face. I mean, you're here to get your tropical disease shot. Like, it's going to work or it's not. That did almost nothing to slow COVID. We also saw this claim. We saw this with monkeypox, too. We saw this with AIDS, Pete. This claim like this disease doesn't much care who you are. No, that's complete bullshit. The average victim of COVID-19 was 81 years old. Guarantee this is true for the first year and a half of the pandemic. All you had to do to some extent was protect the seniors in your life. Like maybe before the vax, wear an effective mask in some packed indoor spaces. If you went to see Granny, keep some gloves on, keep your distance, shop for her. That's what I noticed. A lot of these limousine liberals weren't exactly doing that. They weren't exactly delivering groceries once a week to their grandmother's house. Does their grandmother have a house, or has she been shipped away to some type of retirement ghetto? Yeah. Like, these were real questions, but for the majority of people, to protect yourself against COVID, work out, get your vitamins.
No. We're going to close the golf courses, the tennis courts, and the beaches because that's where people get sick.
Yeah, but I mean, like, spend a lot of time outside in the sun, work out, get your vitamins, and protect the seniors in your life. And I still say take the vaccine if the vaccine's available. Not 9 times, but I mean, those first 2, for mine, we're both men in that 40 or past range. The first 2 were very useful. But that's it. Like, vax up, work out. Most of life is as simple, by the way, as vax up and work out. But we heard all of these crazy lies that led to massive distrust, and they were all exposed as lies. And as the commenters have been saying, in race relations, we see this all the time too. If someone denies that white guys kill themselves more than black guys for many, many reasons, many cultural, or black guys currently commit more robberies than white guys, or as we recently saw the frontispiece of The Atlantic do, right, that men are on average better athletes than women, that person is going to be quietly thought an idiot by most people, no matter what those people say in public. So my advice to people in the leadership class, and we'll both share this on social and a lot of them will watch it, is stop be clowning yourselves to some extent. Just say shit that's true. Like, I always say I think I'm a solid A- methodologist. I think my articles are pretty good. But a lot of the stuff that I do breaking down this stuff is not like logistic regression with a touch of Tobit to it. It's just sort of basically Like I recently, for commentary, I looked at whether, along with Bob Moranto, great guy, good social scientist, but I looked at whether crime went down under Black Lives Matter and whether, oh no, it didn't, it increased like 25%, but also whether police shootings went down under Black Lives Matter. And the second was just the most remarkable piece of data because no one ever mentions it. They did go down very slightly for unarmed black dudes, but we're all humans. So police shootings increased during the BLM era. Like they went up from 994 in 2014 up to 1020 in 2020, up to 1054 last year. And we're on pace for like 1200 this year. So the movement did literally nothing. It had a slight negative effect, actually, because crime increased in black and poor white neighborhoods. And the cops have to use their guns when they're facing criminals. You know, so it's just leaders, stop beclowning yourselves, look at obvious data and make decisions based on that data. Stop saying things like, of course, a boy can be a girl anytime they say they are. This is another one. There's some people with genuine gender dysphoria. Be kind to them. But no, there hasn't been a 10,000% magic increase in the number of people that identify as the opposite sex or as cats or ferrets or kookaburras based on some kind of genetic cause in the past year. It's driven by the bullshit in our society. And anyone who's in the leadership class, business, military, political, has the ability and the moral duty to stop that.
Yeah. 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 And as we learned from Abigail Schreier, this is largely cultural too, because it's not a bunch of, you know, young girls about to go to their quinceañera that are like, oh, you know what? I'm a dude. You know, it's this upper middle class white chicks, you know, and then I don't know about the dude side of it, but she focuses on the lady side. And it's just it's a bunch of nonsense. And if we stay in the world of nonsense, well, I always say, like, if people who have serious jobs can't be taken seriously, we seriously have to work on getting some serious people in that serious business. And that's a lot of seriousness in one sentence, but it remains true. Like I can't take the boss seriously. You know, the guy's been wrong most of his career about things. I can't take people who can't have the patience to allow an investigation to happen before they form their opinion. I don't know. I know what happened. I wasn't there. I don't know the first thing about women's volleyball. I don't even know how many fans were in that stadium. I have to imagine that girls volleyball, not widely attended. Maybe it is at BYU for some reason, but it wouldn't surprise me if there were 800 people in that auditorium and everybody could hear everything, you know, but we don't deal with facts. We deal with emotions, and that gets us nowhere in terms of trying to look. You and I both, we want to reduce suffering. We want to use our resources better, but we can't do it if we're focused on these things. So I guess with that, I will shut up. Do you have anything you want to say? You can have the last word.
No, I think that my final closing comment was pretty on point. Just the leadership class, stop beclowning yourself. People have eyes. They can see what is true.
Perfect. Stand by.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly.